Hello, everyone. So today we have a special guest, Sebastian, with Incuvers. So I'll let him explain a little bit what Incuvers does in a sec, but the subject of the day, as described in the video, is how to raise $1 million in seed or pre-seed funding for your startup. So Sebastian has had the wonderful experience of having just gone through a fundraising round, just closed just shy of $1 million, 800,000. So let's round up to $1 million.
Sure. Does that work for my cash flow as well? Can I just round up and it counts?
Sorry, I can't speak to that part.
Right.
For marketing purposes, we'll say
Yeah.
it's all that to say, it's been quite the adventure. I've been following you, in that process for a while. You've been at it for over a year, if I understand correctly. And we've also got other startups at the Institute who are thinking of raising money, and they're even preparing themselves. Thierry on the call with us is thinking of doing the same with his company Cohesion. And maybe Thierry can also give like a little, descriptor of that. Kamel, who's joining us from France.
Yes,
He's in
exactly.
France.
Yeah.
Looking to come into the IIG programs shortly. Potentially we'll also need to raise some money. So, I wanted to put this together to give people a chance to see concretely, no theory, just concretely, what is it like? What are the challenges that we can expect to face while raising money? Tips, tricks, things to avoid. Everything's open. And so with that, I'll pass the mic to you, Sebastian. Thanks again for coming.
Well, thank you very much for having me. Thanks, guys, for joining the call. So I'll give you a 2-second pitch down about what Incuvers is all about, and then kind of the history and the story of how we got here. So Incuvers, if you look at Incuvers, it looks like we build incubators. Incubators are used for cell culture, so growing stem cells, growing cancer cells, all research. Incubators aren't exciting. They haven't been exciting for 100 years. They're not exciting today, but that's where we come in. So we have kind of taken the next revolutionary step in how we believe researchers should be doing their research. And that is every time they go into the lab, much like they're babysitting their cells, they have to physically go in, they have to take them out, they have to look them under the microscope, they have to make their notes, and they put them back in. They should be doing this depending on what kind of babies you have or what kind of cells you have, either multiple times a day or once every few days. And so what we've done is we've created a system with an integrated imaging system within the incubator. So it allows researchers to look at their phone or their desktop platform and start getting real-time analytics of how their cells are doing. But to take it kind of one notch further, the idea here is that we're collecting, of course, not only their results and everyone else's results, that we start giving them live feedback and analytical feedback on how their cells are performing versus everyone else around the world connected to our system. So the idea here is in 5 to 10 years, we will have a virtual lab assistant literally telling them your cells are performing at 85% efficiency, you're deviating 12% from 622 other labs around the world. Here are recommended products or protocols that could better your results as they've done for others. So it's really just, at the end of the day, Incuvers is just about connecting scientists. That's all we do. So in terms of fundraising, I started the company 2.5 years ago, 2 and a bit years ago, and it was really just me. There's a long backstory about how we started. I do have co-founders. We were part of another company then, and we got kind of split apart because that company was doing a lot of other sciencey, like biomaterial stuff, and they were also building this side project of an incubator. At the time, if you see the history of our incubators, it was a cute, very cute project. And so it was my job to take that cute project into how do you make this into a company that people are going to invest in and that could potentially have $100+ million revenue a year someday. And it was through the initial process of selling a few of those open source stinky incubators that my very first 2 customers put cameras inside of them because they wanted to watch their cells live. And from that point on, it was kind of like that, well, why are we letting them do a terrible job at it when we can offer them a service that would be unprecedented and that would be infinitely high in value? And so that's kind of when it started. So I started the company without having that vision. And before that, no one would talk to us. We were kind of like a mom and pops type business. Potential revenues of $1 million if all the stars aligned. And then once I kind of solidified that and we started getting traction in terms of people being interested, that's when the fundraising started. So my fundraise started in 2018, October, November. So this is a year and a half ago.
If I can interject, and then you can go right back where you left off. But I think what's really interesting about what you just said is that you went from the vision of a smaller company. You had no grand ambitions for it necessarily. You didn't really know what the future would hold. And then it's when you defined a much grander vision that could excite people, and that you saw that there was like resonance with a particular market that maybe, there's a lot of potential in this. That's when it opened up the possibility for raising funds, and also the necessity to raise funds, because to get to that point of building a large company, you need to hire staff, you need to go into R&D as you are currently in, and that requires capital. So it's kind of like the trigger event. And I think it's important to, as a takeaway, it all starts with a vision, right? And not just not just a fairy tale, not anything that's just made up, but actually a vision that's in line with reality. And I think, as we'll find out as you go down, further into your story, fundraising is truly the art of painting a very accurate picture of a potential future where there are capital returns, potential returns on capital, and the investors are convinced enough to want to invest in that future with the entrepreneur and with the company. So I think that's the first important takeaway that we can get from this, and I'll let you take it from there.
Yes, so that's absolutely right. Understanding, this is being recorded, but most investors aren't that smart. They're not that smart. They're smart people, but they're not that smart.
Except Incuvers investors, right?
Yes, exactly, of course. But by that I mean, it's not because they're wealthy that they understand all various parts and components of all businesses and whatnot. And so, to be very honest with you, let's be like, people turned down Uber when it was presented to them. People turned down Airbnb when it was presented to them because they're like, I don't think this would work, or they didn't understand the functioning of it. So what Michael kind of alluded to there is, when you are painting that vision, you are not only painting, yes, what you know to be true or what could be true, you're having to explain it. It's an LE5, this is Reddit. You're explaining it like you're a 5-year-old. Why is this good? Why can it be great? And what are the steps to get there? And how are you gonna make your return? Because again, at the end of the day, this is a return for them. Don't get me wrong, investors are highly emotional people. They don't look like that, but investors invest because they most of the time they have an emotional connection to what you're doing. Some of them can be savvy enough to completely disconnect that, and that's great. But my highest investors, so some of them invested in the 100 range to 125 range, they had either a background in hardware or they believed in the mission that we're attempting to achieve. The ones that do 25 or 50, they're kind of like, this is part of our portfolio. To them, it's in the wish fountain coin. And they're like, we'll see what happens. So anyway, so it was roughly about October, November of 2018. I didn't have a team. I had one guy that I got for free co-op, and my very first hire was not an engineer. It was a marketing guy. And the reason, looking back, that was actually such a great idea was because I didn't have any images to show. I didn't have any website to demonstrate. I didn't have anything for an investor or for anyone else to be like, what's Incuvers all about? And then I would explain it to them and they'd be like, oh, I get it. And then they go back and like, I don't know what he was just talking about it. So that they can just go to the website, scroll through and be like, oh, okay, that's what it looks like. Oh, that's the incubator. So having a vision, sometimes it takes a video or it takes an image. And so having that very well secured in a website as a resource is great. So anyway, so I started off going around left and right to major pitch events, just endless pitch events. And there is no substitute for practice. And you're gonna be terrible. Don't get me wrong, my first pitches were really, really bad. I've probably done, I don't know, realistically, my pitch has probably been done over 500 times. In terms of an audience, I've probably done it maybe 50 times-ish. And so what ends up happening, and this is a skill you have to develop, is, again, you're not pitching your story, you're pitching it to whoever you're listening or to whoever is in the room. So if they're engineers, it's a different story. If they're government, it's a different story. If they're whatever it is. And a lot of the time, you have to get that visual feedback, and you will know if they get it. You understand. I can be within a pitch within 3 minutes, and I will know by their visual feedback and how they're listening to me whether the way I'm explaining it to them is working or whether I need to change.
Yeah. So really important to size up your audience, know who you're talking to.
Yeah.
I'm guessing the government types want to hear about job numbers.
They want to hear about this. Yeah, they want to hear about the backstory, or they want to hear about everything. A lot of other investors, they just want to just give me the numbers. Just give me a sequence of numbers, and I'll be happy. And others want to hear about the science. Others want to hear about the. So you really need to know. I mean, at the end of the day, it's a pitch. You're selling something. And whoever you're selling to, they want to hear a different type of pitch. So refining that pitch is extremely important, and it should get to the point where you're no longer thinking about what you're saying. You're just kind of, it's just coming out, and you're modifying it dynamically as it comes out. If it's not that fluid yet, keep pitching. It'll get there.
Can I ask you?
And I know every CEO that's done it 1,000, they know what I'm talking about. They hate pitching only because they hate the sound of their own voice because they got to do it again. And they know, they're like, oh, you don't want to hear me. Trust me, you don't want to hear me. But they do.
Can I ask you a question, Sebastian?
Yeah.
So you're getting into the pitch now. So I think we get it, like pitching is selling, and you're obviously selling futures. But what are the critical elements of a pitch to investors that will get them to, that'll spark an interest in them?
Yeah.
And beyond that, get them to invest?
Yeah, okay. So, I mean, there are 1,000 templates out there. I'm sure you can go and pitch template. Most of them are good. Some of them are directed towards certain things. At its core, very simple. You have the who you are, like introduction. So backstory to why you started the company, who you are and where it started. You have the mission of the company. You have the total addressable market. You have the monetization and the business model. And then you have
Team?
like, I'm kind of missing one here.
Team? How do we pull it off?
Yeah, you got your team.
Yeah.
Yeah, your team can be important if there are major team, like if you have any members that are high up in there, then it's great. At the time when I started the company, my team was me and another guy. So it was like, anyway. And so, so you have your core elements. Between that, a good pitch is really just about creating a story. It's always about a story. People love stories. They want to be engrossed by what you're doing, and they want to feel that you're excited. And if you don't, and some people are naturally, they're natural presenters. That's great. If you're not, I will tell you, it's going to be harder for you. But you got to get out of your bubble, and you got to get them on the same vibe, the same plane. So I was very fortunate in that sense. I did theater when I was in high school. I did improv when I was earlier in kids. So like that kind of, actually that's why I wasn't a great scientist, to be honest. And I start off my pitch that way. I tell them I did 12 years of university. Okay, I did my undergrad, master's, PhD, 12 years. I stopped because I wasn't a great scientist. I wasn't going to be great. And so I had other skills, and I'm using those skills to help scientists. And generally, I get that feedback from them. They're like, you don't seem like a scientist. It's like, well, I don't know what that means. It's like, you don't seem as smart as the other ones, is really what they're saying. So it's different, right? So know your numbers, number one. So they're going to ask you questions. What's the, whether it's a SaaS platform, whether it's a whatever, you should know all the elements of your numbers. You're not going to know them at first. And eventually you're going to be asked so many times, you're just going to have these numbers floating at the tip of your tongue. It's going to be easy for you. But if an investor starts asking you, regular, and I should also note, by the 5th or 10th time you do the pitch, you're never going to get really super interesting questions that you've never heard before. Very rarely. Yeah. So by you present this 5 times in front of 5 different investors, the event horizon of questions is going to be the same. You're never going to go beyond that. Sometimes you get some interesting curves, and that's great because then you're like, oh, I didn't think of that. That's even better. But most of the time, it's always the basics.
Would you recommend then in those first pitches taking down notes on these main questions that are coming in, and obviously reflecting really hard about how you're going to answer them the next time, and really going into depth? And
so I never took down physical notes, but mental notes were always going in. But yes, if you don't remember these types of things very well, write them down. But what actually ends up happening with those is that every time you get asked, your answer is never the same. It changes because with updated info, my question to, okay, so how do I make money? Or what's the revenue model? Or what's the likely percentage of a transaction going through? What's your churn rate? What's all that kind of stuff? And at the beginning, I'm like, well, I don't know. And then with time, I'm like, oh, well, actually in our first model one, the sales process, once it hit into the lab, was a 93% conversion rate, 0 churn. So so now you're starting to give numbers because you've been prepared before, or you start thinking about those numbers. You're like, oh, I don't know. What is the conversion rate on a purchase for an incubator? And then, so your answers will and should change over time. And to you, it may not look like your pitch is changing and your answers are changing much, but to the observer now asking you, I can tell you that they're going to see a completely different entrepreneur in front of them being like, okay, this guy has thought about this. Because at the end of the day, that's all they really want. They want to see that you have thought about the minute details. Because if you haven't thought about those, there's no way you're going to successfully do anything else. So, anyway, I started doing all the major angel investors, Maple Leaf Angels, York Angels, Capital Angel Network. I'm thinking of GTAN. I did them all. I didn't get anything except Capital Angel Network. Capital Angel Network was the only official angel investment company or investment group in Ontario that I got money from. All the other ones kind of passed us.
Yeah.
There may be multiple reasons for that. Number one, I think we were a little early, but the thing is we're a hardware company. So I don't know if you guys are a hardware company, but to even get to well, show me your MVP. So that's another thing. So, so investors, you should get this very ingrained into your head right now. Investors know all the questions to ask, but they have been ingrained with a SaaS type model system. So when they start asking, what's your churn rate? What's your CAC? These are all SaaS questions, because these are all the metrics that that kind of Facebook really started off, but that Silicon Valley is now poised with. You ask all these questions because they're all SaaS related. If you're asking a hardware company, what's your cost of acquisition? What's your churn rate? What's all that kind of stuff? It's a different game. You need $1 million to get a hardware company off the ground before you even get those metrics. So when you present your metrics to them, you're like, oh, well, we don't have churn rate yet. We don't really have a CAC. We don't have much revenue at all. And they're like, well, I have 6 other companies in my portfolio right now that can give me every single one of those answers and that can give me predictions on their growth rate based on the bootstrapped version they have of what you think you have. So you're going to be fighting that if you're hardware. If you're not hardware, God bless you. But I was a hardware company, so I needed $500,000 before I could show them a prototype. And so that's what ended up happening. I spent the money. So we had a rolling close. Make sure you get a rolling close so that you can use the money as you go. So at no given point, so I gave a talk at one of our retreats this summer, and I was doing a cash flow kind of graph over the year. At no point did I ever have more than 60 grand in the bank. We were literally rolling on 60K. I get money in, it went out. Went in, out, in, out. And that was the only way to actually ever get, okay, I get some in, I leverage grants, pay minimum for the employee because he understands the vision, and all of a sudden we get a 3D render of what we're gonna build. And then we get a prototype of what we're gonna build. And then when I started going to the later angel investment groups, I had a prototype. Boom, I brought my suitcase. Here it is. This is what it's gonna look like, right? Touch it, you wanna play with it. And eventually I started having to sell what I went from selling a dream. I just started selling the system I just had in front of me. And it's night and day. I mean, once someone can touch what you're talking about and be like, oh, I get it now. That's really cool. It just helps. And of course, no one wants to be the first investor. So it's too high risk. So it took me a year and 2 months to raise 500K. It took me a month and a half to 2 months to raise 300. And that was the last 300. So I raised my 300K during COVID. Took about 2.5 months. It was done. I had investors that invested in me before. I gave them updates. So this is something you need to do. They love hearing updates. So all your investors you have, you send them an update once every quarter or whatever. Be like, hey, this is what we did. This is where we're going. We now have a customer and blah, blah, blah. And they love it. They love hearing about it. I raised another 125K by doing that. Just by sending emails back to my old investors, and I'm like, you know what, that's awesome. Here's another 50, or here's another 25. So that it does work, and they want to know. They want to know how you're doing. Yeah.
I have a question regarding hardware stuff. So yeah, I work with a lot of softwares, but I also have a hardware project. So what would you do different to make that process better? Like, I mean, is there some tips you can share with me? Because I ran into the same issue. It's like trying to get money for hardware. It's like you cannot do with 100,000. You need a lot of money because you got to prototype, and prototyping, it doesn't work. Like, it's not like software. Yeah, just go back and write a code, and this one goes through a whole process when something small changes. So when there's a bug, it's not a software issue, it's a hardware. So you got to go back to manufacturing. So it's really hard. And I found like I just kept spending my money. So now the idea is there, but what would you do different? Like now, you went through this process. Let's say you decide to build another hardware company tomorrow. Like how would it be different than the first time?
Yeah. So I have an engineering firm I work with, and they have been kind of helping us with the preliminary designs and the whole. So everything you see there was kind of designed with them. How would I do that differently? I would work on, number one, very first thing I would do is understand what can you get away with building a prototype without spending significant money. I mean, under $1,000 bucks. What can you build? Whatever you can get in a physical, tangible form that you can present in front of an investor, number one, do it. It doesn't have to look great, okay? And let's be honest, you can get away with like a lot with 3D printers now. You can get away with a lot, like you can do a lot. That would be my number one. My number two is I would get a 3D render of the entire thing to have pictures and everything about how it's going to look and what it's doing. I'd get that done. So that's kind of like my marketing thing. It took me a while to get there. I would do everything humanly possible to make the investor or whoever's going to maybe potentially give you money something tangible and visual to understand what you're building. That would be number one. Number two, one of the greatest mistakes we made was we jumped the gun too quickly in terms of trying to grow and scale how many units we were going to build and whatever. So I'll give you an example. I did tests with the engineering firm, and they did condensation tests and temperature tests, and everything seemed fine. So we started off with the first 15 units of building and manufacturing. That cost me 45 grand. And then when I did the tests myself, I saw nothing but humidity everywhere and condensation. So I spent $45,000 with a mistake. Oh, that hurts my heart. So my thing to you would be, the rule of thumb I would do in the forward is never build more than 3 systems.
Yeah,
Okay, number one, you build one, but you make sure 100% that works. So I don't know the complexity of your hardware, right? So that could be easy for some. That could be almost impossible for others. I don't know. We could have a chat afterwards if you want about how that works. But ultimately, at the end of the day, there is no 100% easy way to do it. You're essentially having to invest. You're having to get investments while you regurgitate that to do other things. I leveraged a lot of grants. So when Michael said he raised over $1 million, he's not wrong. I've raised probably over 250,000 in grants. So leverage those grants. Form the relationship partners with OCE, with IRAP, with any of the funding agencies. Each one of these funding agencies has a rep. That rep is responsible for, they're like an investor. They're picking and choosing which company is going to make them look good when they go back to their superiors and say, oh yeah, Incuvers or wherever else, they're one of my portfolio companies. I gave them granting aid money, and look what they did with it, right? So like, okay, they're not evil and altruistic, but it's still a bit of like, this is, they're part of the team. So my OCE rep, my IRAP rep, they're part of my team because they're giving me funds that I'm leveraging to build stuff with. So form relationships with them. Don't just minimize it to an email. Okay, meet with them, update them, put them part of your shareholder email updates. So we also have an email update for stakeholders. So anyone in our network that has ever talked to us, they get added to that. And when we send out another email, hey, by the way, now our system's in Australia. We now have our first beta out.
Great advice.
These types of things, yeah. And they're not long, complicated email. We had a tile format. It said financing. We've raised 200,000. R&D. Here's what the new prototype looks like. Team. We have a new member. And that's it. It should take them 30 seconds to look at everything. Beautiful, because they don't want to read more. They don't want a newsletter that's complicated. They want to look at it. Perfect. Now they understand who you are, where you are, and the advancements. That's what we really want to see. My IRAP rep and my OCE rep were really hesitant at giving me money at the beginning. And with time, they're like, here's what we did with that money. Oh, that's cool. Oh, look, I have another teammate. Oh, okay. All right, this guy he's not anyone. He's actually doing what he's saying he's going to be doing. So follow up with people.
Sebastian, Dinesh is going to have to drop off. He just private messaged me, but I'll put you guys.
Sorry. So I would love to talk to you, Sebastian, and it's just that I had
follow up. Add me on LinkedIn. Send me a calendar invite. Let's talk.
Let's talk. Thank you very much. I'll talk to you soon. Thank you.
All right, take care.
Bye, guys.
Bye, Dinesh. I do have a couple of questions for you. So I understand the pitch and how to. So what's the background of this? So how do you legally deal with these people? What do you give them? What does it cost you? What's your cost? Because I'm sure there's a cost. So you got 800. Did you have to spend 200 on lawyers? That's a mystery. And how's the due diligence on their part? How much of your time and investment you have to spend on that? So essentially, in your experience, what was the cost of getting $1 million?
That's a great question. Are we talking about my time? Because that does not count.
Whatever you feel like you should share, and we can stop the recording if you feel it's too.
Yeah, no, that's no problem. Yeah.
Okay.
In terms of let's say legal. In terms of legal, I want to say about 20 to 30 maybe.
1,000?
Yeah.
Okay, not millions, 20, right?
Yeah, 20. I'd say about 20,000. About 20,000. So the reason why I'm having such difficulty putting a number to it is very simple. It's because the legality of raising that 800,000, maybe that was 10,000. But all the legal documents I've had to make in the meantime, whether they were investor purpose or they were for other things, let me see your stock option plan. Let me see your shareholders agreement. Let me see your, every other element that you should have as a business, but that's not necessarily quintessential for an investment. They're going to want to see that anyway.
Yeah, no, that's part of it. So
and everything else that goes into it. But so I want to say, in terms of legal, let's say about 20 to 25,000. In terms of transportation, time, going on that, I'd say probably another 50 in terms of that.
So you were essentially, for a period of time, almost full-time getting...
I was full-time raising, I want to say 60 to 70% of my time was constantly trying to go out and raising money for like a year and 20. Like maybe not 60, let's say 50% of my time.
Okay, so how do you envision this if you have to do this in 3 years again, because you want to do another big push and you have 100 clients that you have to take care of and you need to close 2 new clients per month? Yeah. So how do you see yourself doing this? Well, probably it's easier because you already got that first investor, like you said.
So I don't envision doing that. My team will take care of that. So at this point, my sole responsibility, and this is actually something that I have had a great deal of trouble with, and that I think most CEOs probably at some point is, I started building those incubators in my house. So detaching myself from product and being in the grains every day, nitty gritty, to actually my responsibilities as a CEO is to grow the business, which is identifying talent, identifying money sources of capital, and pushing markets and sales in wherever we're going. So like when you ask me, okay, well, how do you plan on doing that? Well, I can safely say my CTO and my team and my marketing guy takes care of the interactions between the customer and all the technical capabilities that are required to make the business run. And then I'm responsible to make the business grow. So detaching yourself from that. So I don't know how many team members you have, but if you're realistically looking at raising capital while growing the business, and like you can't do it. Like, I mean, maybe you can, maybe you're an Elon, I don't know. But realistically, if you're getting money in, then you have money to go out to get an employee or two to take over.
No, I get that. I was just trying to gauge the depth of commitment that needs to be put in to get. And
so like when I say it takes a lot of my time, it's like every day you're going to be sending out 10 emails or 10 conversations with regards to that around your regular work stuff, right? So it's really about interrupting your work, really. So financing is about interrupting you while you're trying to get other things done.
Yeah. Okay. No. And what's the expectation of the return? Do they ask what type of investors? So do you have investors that want to exit in 2 years? Do you have long-term investors? Yeah. Do they react differently? Do you have institutional investors versus private ones?
So the answer to that is every investor is a different human being. Some of them will want to get out and they're looking at, okay, what can you return on at 3 or 4 year mark? Some of them are saying, you know, that we know this is going to be a 7 to 10 year play. Some of them are like, listen, I'm willing to invest if I get a 10x return. Some of them won't invest unless they have a 50x return. So there is no standard. However, with Silicon Valley being Silicon Valley, they are creating gold standards of what investors are expecting now, right? So some investors won't put in more than a $10,000 or $20,000 and they want a 1,000x return like Uber, okay? They can expect that, but good luck. So there is no...
Can you respectfully decline and tell them to...
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So at the beginning of my investments, we were accepting 10,000 as investments, and then a third of the way through or midway through, we brought about up to 25,000. Minimum investment was 25,000 because exactly like you said, investments of 10,000 now are not worth my time because it's going to take too much of my time. It's going to take too much of the lawyer fees. It's just not worth it. So it'll cost me 2,000 or 3,000 just to get your 10. You know, like I don't want to do that. So realistically, at this point now, if I was to keep getting money in, I would have 25 being my minimum, 50 being preferential. And at that chunk, okay, good. That's a good deal. That gives us, you know, a month or two worth of runway. That's something valuable. Let's keep going. So yes, that does change. That does change.
And if I may ask, and you don't have to answer, I wouldn't, but I'm still gonna ask. So how much did you have to give away at this point, in terms of percentage?
So we did a convertible note, and our convertible note is we did a 4 million cap, and that was a 4 million cap with no discount. And then during COVID times, we gave an additional discount of 20%.
So on convertible note, that means that you can refund them. Well, you can pay them back.
So in a convertible note, they convert on certain terms. Now that could be time dependent, or that can be money, like funds raised dependent. So if we raise, you know, in our next investment, if we raise over 750 or $1 million in one go, they convert automatically. Or they can choose to get refunded their money with interest, because they get 5% interest every year. I don't really see any investor saying I want my money back with 5% interest. If they wanted that, they could invest in, like, you know, whatever, simple bonds or whatever. So they're in it for a higher return. So at this point, I don't know the exact amount, but it's in the 17 to 20% range that's been given out.
So you're on the hook for 20% essentially.
Yeah.
Okay.
In general, every investment round is roughly about 20%.
Yeah.
That's the ballpark. So your first, and of course, hopefully you end up giving away, you end up getting more, of course, for that 20%. So no, of course. We got 800,000 this time. Next time, hopefully we'll get 2, 3, 4 million. Hopefully we don't need another one after that. That would be great. We end up being what's recently called a Pegasus instead of a unicorn.
Whatever that is.
Well, a Pegasus is essentially that you can just fly the way without having to raise.
Oh, okay.
So you reach unicorn status without having to do a round, B round, C round. And some companies are achieving that, and they're just ridiculous, right? But
no, but that's also my goal, because one of my concerns also is those getting an investor. If you're doing well, that investor's interest in having more of your equity is there. So they're probably going to be trying to get more and more of the equity.
If they believe in you. But just remember that angel investors are very, 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 very unlikely to probably reinvest in your seed round, your A round. I'm not saying it won't, but it's a different it's a different investor beast, because one of them can afford the 20 to 100,000 range. Once you start going into seed or A round, you're looking at minimum investments of 100 to 500,000 investments. So like most angels in the Ottawa region, that's a bit too rich for their blood. If you're in maybe Toronto, Silicon Valley, sure, they'll give that to you as a flip a coin just to see what you'll do with it. But depending on who invested, they're not going to get that many that have the financial capability or willingness to invest in your next round. It's not like if they're in your seed round. So you're going to get probably a small venture firm that'll probably throw in 100 or 500,000 or maybe $1 million. They could be very likely to invest in your A round, to put in another $1 million, $2 million, $3 million, whatever. So that spectrum of how much they're willing to put in is very high with seed and A. The pre-seed round, friends and family round, the person who can afford 10,000, 50,000. Once you start going to 100 to 500,000, that's a different beast.
Yeah. If I can, Thierry is the head of Cohesion, and you mentioned earlier that SaaS companies are easier to raise for, and his is a SaaS, but on top of that, he's got a significant amount of traction. So not to say that it's going to be easy, because it never is, and you're dealing with people's money, but I'm excited to see how the round is going to proceed based on those facts. And I'm guessing, Thierry and Sebastian being part of our network, you guys will interact very likely off the call. I'm curious to hear from Kamel. I don't know if you wanted to participate, puis tu peux parler en français si tu veux.
That's okay, I can speak in English.
It doesn't matter. It's all free game. Kamel also is looking to build a more of like a software type company.
Yeah.
And anyways, Kamel, si tu as des questions, n'hésite pas.
Of course. Yeah, we have a SaaS product. We want to develop a platform which connects managers and their employees with simplicity. We are now with simplicity, with indicators, and you can trigger the right conversation on the right topic with a very simply. The thing is, what is the tilting point when you get the first rounds? Because you said I pitched a lot, and then one day I got lucky. I had the one investor that finally understood me. So what is the best way to find the right investor as soon as possible?
That answer is very, very easy. There is no one way. You just got to keep pitching.
All right.
It's statistics. It's just sheer statistics. You're going to eventually, if I was to tell you, listen, I will guarantee you that you're going to get 1 in 100 investors. I'll guarantee you it. That still requires you to go talk to 100 investors. So there is no, maybe it could be 1 in 100 and you hit him or her on your third go. Amazing. Good for you.
Yeah.
Maybe you'll hit it on the 50th go or the 99th go. But really, your job as a CEO is to maximize the number of interactions you have everywhere. Right. And eventually from that, you will maximize the connections for financing, for R&D, for talent, for everything. So like it's the role of a CEO is actually really ambiguous. It's really kind of like, what do you do all day, to be honest? And sometimes you going to a party, sometimes you going to a wine and dine event, sometimes you going, it sounds like, oh yeah, I'm just going for dinner. Well, actually, it might be that, but your job is actually to meet as many people as you can over there and to find connections and be like, what do you do? Oh, interesting. Why? Okay, well, let's talk about, and that it's actually exhausting. Like, I mean, I don't know if you've ever been to a dinner party and you're forced to talk to everyone. It's tiring. It sounds easy. And let's be honest, not everyone's interesting. So you're going to go through some boring conversations. But you got to do it. And that's your role. So my number one answer to that is just talk to more and more and more. Because at the end of the day, the real truth is the one investor you meet being like, and I've got this before, is like, you know what, this is not for me. I don't know this field. I have 3 other people in mind that you should talk to. And then you're like, really? Okay, you write them down, you email them that day. I'd love to talk to you next week. And then it begins. And then one of those are gonna be like, not my thing. So glad I talked to you. You should talk to my friend. And you're just gonna keep doing that, and you're gonna keep doing that until one of them hits.
Okay. So you have to pitch and get used to do it until you meet the first good investor.
Yeah.
But that's good. That's optimistic, because sometimes people do maybe 10, 20 pitches and they say, okay, my idea is not good enough, and I quit.
It's an insane balance between knowing that you're right and actually being right and moving forward, or knowing you're right and you're so completely off the mark and you don't realize it yet. It's very dangerous, and it's very hard to know the difference. I'd like to think I got it right, but Michael may set up another call this time next year, and I'm going to be like, guys, my incubator was a really stupid idea, and I wasted $800,000 proving it. I hope that's not the case, but.
One more question. You mentioned you raised 300 during the COVID.
Yeah.
What's your feeling on the investors during the COVID? Do you see them as wanting more? Because let me rephrase, do they feel there's a higher risk currently with investing, or do they see this as day-to-day, or is it an advantage? What's your feedback on that?
Yeah, so my gut would be that it'll depend on your market. So some investors might be more keen to invest in you because of COVID, because whatever you're doing is COVID pro-COVID. That happened to us as well. So our system, like, ideally in the future, if COVID hits again and the entire government platform was on our iris system, they could simultaneously test or share their vaccine testing in a single platform. Like, they could understand how all the multitude of researchers are doing this. So that kind of helped for us. But investor-wise, they did want more. They're like, this is a high-risk time. I want COVID terms.
Okay, right? And what did you say? Did you tell them to fuck off, or you?
Unfortunately not. I gave them an additional 20% discount on my raise, and I did get permission from all my other investors prior. I sent out an email. If you don't do that, you better run, because we're going to come for you. Because essentially what you're doing is saying, hey, remember a year ago when you invested in me and I was 10x higher risk? Well, now I'm having to get a new investor with the same terms, but better, with a lower risk, because I'm a 1 year further. So I went to them, I said, listen, guys, I appreciate obviously everything you've done. I'm having to raise more money because we're coming to a cusp where I may not make it. Because of COVID, I need to give them better terms because these are the ongoing terms. Are you okay with that? If any of you want to reinvest more money, I will give you the preferential terms. That worked. I got 2 people who joined more, who got those preferential terms.
Smart.
So it's a bit difficult at the moment because COVID has kind of like, the fear of COVID has kind of passed, and now it's kind of like on the rise a bit again now.
A little bit, yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of coming back a little.
That's it.
Realistically, I think in terms of an investor point of view, the COVID momentum fear has probably subsided. But I don't want to speak for them. Some of them may still be there. Some of them are like, yeah, we're okay with this. This is fine. But it definitely has influenced investors during the time I invested, or that I was looking for.
So then were you in a position where you had to give them 20% because you needed to move forward? You couldn't bluff your way out of this one, right? Okay. So then if I'm speaking about myself here. So if I go and then I get some guy, so I'd love to have funding. I'm going to go for it, but not at any price. So I can actually tell them to get lost and find someone that's more comfortable.
If you have that leverage and luxury, amazing.
Well, it's just a matter of...
I didn't because I had a team of 6 people.
Yeah, that's what I'm afraid of, is when you get into, you put that finger in the le doigt dans l'engrenage,
right?
Then okay, you have to feed the beast afterwards.
So that's what happens. And with a hardware company like mine, I'm trying to stay as lean as possible. But at the end of the day, if I need to make advancements and get our product out to market, I need a team. So
no, I understand you. It's not easy doing what you did. You're doing great, actually, because putting, especially in the medical sector, these guys are, this is complex. This is, I'm assuming you have to go through all sorts of validation processes and all that stuff. Anyway, I'll stop talking because I think Michael is telling me to shut up. So
I just have one last question.
Thank you.
No problem.
That's it. Just one last one. Where are you at right now? Because you raised money. So what are your plans now?
So
fast growing phase.
Right. So I should state that we have had some R&D mishaps where we thought we were ready and that didn't work and that kind of thing. So we've been kind of doing this. We, out of the 800,000 that we raised, remember that was for about a year and a bit. So we have less than half of that now for functional cash. And so we are essentially at a point where next month we will be releasing our newest Iris system to its first customer. And that we actually have 2 or 3 customers. Well, we have a long list of customers that have been waiting, but we want to play it a bit slow, let them test it, see how it's running in their lab. We've already have a system in Australia, but it didn't have the optics. But we're very we're very fortunate because we can remotely update the firmware from HQ. So we've had problems, but then we updated the system from here and we've solved them. So that's the luxury again of our hardware system, is that yes, it is hardware, but we can actually update it remotely. So moving forward in the next, let's say the next quarter, our #1 priority is the release of our system, and to get at least 2 or 3 systems out in the wild being used by our customers so that we can get validation that the design is good, so that we can then ramp up production Q1 of next year.
Okay.
That is our ultimate #1 goal, is to get the system in the hands of our customers and to make sure it is as functional as we know it to be, and then accelerate. So yeah, that money will be used to get that done and to keep us alive for the early of next year. And then let's see, that's a matter of how much are sales, or do we go ahead and raise a seed round?
Okay.
That's right. So, and just to follow up on that, and since you're already expecting to raise at the beginning of 2021, you're already thinking of who is it that I'm going to line up and go see then. And,
I already have an extensive list of VCs and other people that we spoke to, and they told me, listen, this is cool. Get your first 10 units out in the field with sales and then come back to me.
Yeah. So you basically put them on a waiting list or like further down the line, and it's like, this is the KPI they're looking for, the OKR. When we reach that, we'll open the door, and they, if they're true to their word, they should be good for an investment if things haven't changed too much on their end. I want to wrap it up now. It's been a fantastic call, lots of learnings. And what I particularly liked is that we got a firsthand account of someone who's gone through this, in the last few months and over the last couple of years almost. And so it's really good practical information. My key takeaways: fundraising is serious business. It's something that requires more than full time, more than 40 hours a week when you're running a startup. You're playing with people's money, so you're playing with their livelihoods, and it is very serious for that reason. You've got to come with good arguments.
And it's going to take longer than you think.
Yes.
It's going to take longer than you think. Thierry, you were asking me about their due diligence and whatnot. To close the Capital Angel Network, it took me 4 months, 3.5 months.
How
from
much
pitching.
probing did they actually buy you lunch at least before all that probing? No.
Well, maybe during the presentation. So anticipate, even if you get a meeting next week, it's gonna take. Don't get me wrong. I've had investors where I met with them. They're like, "This is great. I'll send you the money." Took them 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Those are angels, actual angels. Expect 3 to 4 months with bigger firms.
Yeah, I think I said the same thing to Thierry, and another little thing that I said was prepare for the due diligence because it's going to come no matter what. So get all your stuff in order, and by the time they ask for it, you can drop it on their desk, and they'll be very happy to go through this well organized.
One last question.
Yes.
Did you have any investors that required a specific architecture of your business legally? Meaning, did they make you change the legal structure of your business?
Yes.
So
but to be honest, we had a highly complicated share structure and stock option structure that I'm not going to get into the details of, was recommended to us, which was a very bad idea. What you want to do is have the fewest number of shares in your structure. You can do A common and B common, or A common and B preferred. Just have 2 different options. One for founders and one for everyone else. They're probably both going to be wanting to be voting. You can try and get away with giving away non-voting shares. Good luck with that. I think any savvy, semi-savvy investor are not going to want non-voting shares. They're going to want voting shares. And they're probably going to want preferred, just because they get money out first if the business is to sell. So my suggestion to you, to be honest, what they're going to want is just 1 share structure, where the founders and everyone else has the same. You don't want that. But so my recommendation is just to have 2 simple share structures. One of them are founding shares. There are certain advantages to those. And the other is the ones you give to your employees. It's the one you give to your investors. They're voting shares and they're preferred, and that's it.
All right, gentlemen.
Or we had A common, preferred, B, C, blah, and it was.
I'm going to have to cut it off there. Thank you very much, Sebastian, and everybody else who joined.
Add me on LinkedIn, guys. If you want to talk, you send me a shout out.
Sure.
I'll connect you all if need be. Thanks again, and this will be up soon. Cheers.
Merci.
Thank you, Michael.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so much.